want to give you a few things to look for in chapter 2, written by N.T. Wright. So he essentially comes out with his thesis in the first sentence that we know Jesus in two ways, history and faith. And so I want to take a few seconds and kind of walk through some of these core things. So he identifies really early on the split between history and faith on the one hand, religion and politics on the other. There are other splits that we have in our society. Unfortunately, a lot of us are raised thinking that if you believe in any sort of a kind of religious conviction, you cannot believe in evolution. And so there's a split between science and religion. So remember from chapter 1, Marcus Borg touches on that a little bit. And so the question I want to ask is, does N.T. Wright want us to separate history from faith? So let me kind of give you just a quick heads up. He doesn't. He doesn't want us to keep these separate. He doesn't want us to keep history on the one hand separate from faith. He thinks that a single world with multiple interlocking dimensions is much more true to the world that you and I inhabit. He goes on to talk about how we all look at history through our own lenses, through our own spectacles. He's British, and so he uses the word spectacle. But I want to ask kind of a personal question. Does the lens that you interpret the world through distort or change the world in which you see history? You know, it's interesting how we all have different lenses. And it's tough sometimes teaching a religion class because so many of us come in with these lenses, maybe even like surgically embedded in our eyes. And it's hard to second guess our lenses or to think that our lenses might be doing over here, blurring a specific perspective. And so he talks about hermeneutics. Hermeneutic is basically a theory of interpretation. And so he differentiates between a hermeneutic of suspicion, which he is arguing that Marcus Borg is operating out of. He isn't trusting of the text whenever he reads something that there's this level of suspicion immediately. And N.T. Wright perhaps is proposing that we operate from a hermeneutic of trust. And so remember, he says that there are two ways in which we know about Jesus. We know Jesus, history on the one hand and faith on the other. And so just a couple of things. Historians lust after evidence. Be sure you understand what he's arguing here, is that we want as much evidence as we can. And he thinks that at the end of the day, the evidence that we find historically will give us quite a bit of knowledge about Jesus. And then he argues, finally, that the goal of faith is to not know about Jesus, but it's rather to know Jesus. So be sure you're pretty comfortable on those last couple of pages when he talks about, you know, if somebody were standing out in a rainstorm, they wouldn't say, like, I believe it's raining. They would say, I know it's raining. In many ways, I don't think that he would argue that the goal of Christianity is to believe in Jesus. I do think that he's arguing that the goal of Christianity is to know Jesus. And so the conclusion, he writes this on the second to last page, is that the goal or history prevents faith from becoming fantasy. In other words, history grounds faith. And then faith prevents history from becoming mere antiquarianism. In other words, faith brings history alive. It makes it more than simply an antique to be left for those of us to study who like history. And so be sure that you understand how both faith and history allow an individual to know Jesus.